so much for having me. I have to apologize for my voice. I'm getting over a cold, so I'm at the tail end here. But even after a couple of days of moderating, I still have my voice, so I'm thankful for that. So let me get going here. So a little bit about me. I am the senior researcher here at UE Group. So we're a research and consulting company here in Silicon Valley in California. Not so sunny California today, but California nonetheless. I've been here for about 13 years and have seen the research landscape, specifically with regard to usability testing, kind of ebb and flow over the years. And that's really why I wanted to talk about this today, is to talk about how to kind of change our thinking about usability testing based on some of the experiences that I've had over the years. So we're very fortunate here at UE Group. We have a great usability testing space. We've got 2 labs and a lot of flexible space to be able to run wonderful sessions. Another thing that I think is wonderful is we've been able to work with a ton of clients. And I think why I bring that up to talk about that today is, each client that we work with in a consulting firm is different, and they have different needs, and they have different budgets and different timelines and different questions that they want to have answered. And so in all of these years of going through different types of studies for different types of clients in all kinds of industries, it's been really wonderful to be able to sort of develop a toolkit of sorts of ways to deal with different types of research questions that each of our clients have. So today, basically what we're going to be covering is talking a little bit about usability testing today, or traditionally, I guess, might be a better way of thinking about it. And then talk a little bit about how it has changed, or at least from my perspective, how I've seen it change. And then talk about what opportunities have opened up. And that's really where we're going to spend the majority of our time. My goal for today is I hope to encourage you and inspire you to think about some different ways to conduct usability testing, to get out of the lab or get out of whatever methodology you might currently be most comfortable in, and try something different, even if it means that it's going to be a challenge for you or put you out of your comfort zone, and hopefully just give you some practical tips that will make that a little bit simpler. So usability testing in general, I would say, is traditionally kind of defined as really wanting to understand how and why your users are doing what they're doing. And I guess another aspect of that is really wanting to watch and learn, but to be able to have that in some guided way, right? There's other types of research methods like ethnography and different things that we can do. But usability testing has traditionally been the way that we can provide our users with tasks or with something that they're going to need to do, and we can evaluate how they do it and then ask them why, or to understand the reasons why behind it. Put another way, usability testing is simply made up of, the formula is simply recruiting users, recreating a scene, reenacting those tasks, and understanding the reasons behind it. So, when you boil it down and you start to think about how usability testing at its most simplistic way is really just about finding people, putting them into the context of what they're going to be doing, having them do it, and then understanding what worked and what didn't work and the reasons why. So when we think about it simply like that, it begins to open up the opportunity for a lot of different ways to get to those answers. So over the years, over the last 30 years, really, long before my time, there have been so much technology that's come along to be able to provide really robust and credible research labs. We have a great one. There's great ones all across the country and all across the world. I am fortunate to have at my fingertips a lot of technology to be able to run usability testing sessions. And that's a really great place to be able to be living in. In our particular labs, and our particular philosophy is to try to make the experience be as natural as possible, to be in an environment where there's no obvious cameras, or at least not right in front of our users' faces. In addition, we don't want to have, as much as we can, we don't want the user to feel tethered to what they're doing. So this is important for me to note, just because this comes, when I'm talking about these ideas of how to do different types of usability testing, I'm coming at it from this spirit of wanting to be as natural and untethered as possible for the participant. And that's kind of a value that we take in whatever methodology we employ. But I know that not every one of you, or not every company has usability testing labs. Sometimes you are working with small spaces, or sometimes no lab at all, and that's fine. There are some problems with traditional usability testing, even though I love our labs that we have. You know, one of the biggest ones is recruiting, and I hate to break it to you, but that is going to constantly be a problem, even with some of the things that I'm going to bring up, but hopefully I'll throw in some other ideas as well. You know, not having a lab and not having equipment is a problem, and can be a block to being able to do usability testing. But, you know, one of the biggest things is time and money. I know that labs are expensive. I know that it also takes a lot of time. I've spent the last 4 days myself doing moderating in a lab. I hardly saw the daylight at all. It is definitely a taxing thing to do traditional usability testing. And I'm sure you could think of other things on your list about some of the problems that you've had. But you know, what I've seen recently, or at least in the last 5 years, is that the pendulum has really swung in terms of what people expect for usability testing. When I first started, we were running 100-person studies on, 1 month to 2 month sprints, and we had plenty of time for recruiting and plenty of time for running the sessions, plenty of time in between sessions, and then plenty of time to report. So over the last few years, I've definitely seen everything shrink. The numbers of people that you can fit in to the shorter time frames, to the shorter budgets. And so we've had to be really flexible with how we get really good feedback in the midst of those changes. So lean usability testing, agile testing has become very popular, and it's a wonderful thing, but there's also problems with this as well. I've seen in a lot of cases doing friends and family, which is wonderful. It's better to get some kind of feedback than no feedback at all. But oftentimes this can lead to a questioning of the integrity of that data. Do you kind of include some kind of a bias to your friends and family who are doing this project for you? Are they really giving you the full, their actual opinion? We might be doing some lean testing and having small numbers, and while I agree with small numbers in most cases, there are plenty of cases where we need to have a lot of numbers. And sometimes, just doing things agile can actually create more work and actually have us spend more money. I think about it in terms of when we try to do like a home remodel project ourselves, but then we end up having to hire professionals. Sometimes I think if we're not thinking about it all the way through, sometimes we can actually create more harm than good. But it's still a really great thing. It's great to have both the lean usability testing and to have traditional usability testing. So if there's negatives to both of them, what should we be doing? Well, that's really what I want to spend today talking about, is what we can do and how we can kind of tackle this and think about the right way to approach some of our research, or different ways to approach some of our research. So the first thing that I want to say is don't overcomplicate it. So I want to let you in on a little secret about me. I am a recovering perfectionist. I definitely still struggle with the idea of wanting to make sure that whatever I touch is going to be perfect. I'm not going to put it past any of you to potentially find a typo even in this presentation, and I'm going to be okay with that. The idea, even with our methods as researchers, is we find something and we want to just execute it perfectly. And I do want to execute it perfectly. But sometimes when we're trying new things, we need to make sure that we know that we need to just not worry about knowing exactly what to do. We need to just do what we know. And so take the skills that you have, take the natural abilities, the practiced abilities, the talents, all of the all of the experience that you've gained over the years, and take that with you to try new forms of research, new styles of doing usability testing. Don't worry about if you don't get it perfect the first time. You may never get it perfect. But the idea is that you should just do something. And I would even say do something a little bit different to keep things mixed up and to keep you on your toes as a researcher. So another thing, that we can do is scale it. So, this is just a very overused term, but the spirit really is true. Sometimes a test might look like a 50-person study in a usability lab, but sometimes it's going to look like paper on a table in a coffee shop with someone. Sometimes the same study that you did and had really great success with in one case might actually be able to be scaled down to be something that is done in a more agile way. So, don't just throw out the baby with the bathwater in terms of some of the methods that you've been using. I want to encourage you to think about how you could take some of those methods and scale it down or scale it up based upon the project that you have. So the first thing that you really need to do is decide what you want to answer. And this is a kind of a pet peeve of mine in terms of starting a research plan. It's like a research plan or a brief doesn't have some kind of a question that wants to be answered. I always want to get to the bottom of what that actually is, not just because I want to deliver the results, but because I want to make sure that when whatever we're planning methodology-wise is going to get us the actual answer that we're trying to see. So usability testing, research in general, has a lot of different types of questions that people are asking. And I think one of the best things that we can really do is sit with our client or sit with our stakeholders or sit with ourselves if we need to and think about what is that question and what's going to be best served. Sometimes people come to us and they ask straight for usability testing, but when they tell us what their question is, we realize that that's actually going to be better suited as a diary study, or it's going to be better suited as ethnographic research. And a lot of times, I'm sure many of you have seen this, people come wanting a focus group because it's the only kind of conversation that they have about how to get user feedback, but what they really want is a usability test. So help people understand the terms and do that by listening to the question and really thinking about the right way to answer that. So once you have your question, then the next thing you're going to want to do is take a bit of an inventory. So don't just jump straight to the answer. The way I'm going to answer my question is usability testing. You may need to take a step back and think, okay, I might try a different way of doing this usability testing, but first I want to prioritize the importance here. So I put together a little list here to just sort of think about some of the things that you might want to prioritize or think about when trying to decide which of these methods that we're going to talk about might be important. And as we go through the methods, I'll kind of highlight which of these it satisfies, each of those methods satisfies. So sometimes the number of people is going to be really important to you. And so it's going to render some of these ideas for usability testing not valid because you're going to need just large amounts of people. In some cases, we're in Silicon Valley. In some cases, doing the testing here is not great. In some cases, it's excellent. But, where that testing is going to take place, whether it's in one city, multiple cities, or needs to be representative of a huge segment is also really important. You also need to consider your time and your cost investment in this, and sometimes one of those might take priority over the other, or cost may be the most important priority. You need to keep it down, and from there you need to determine what you can and can't do. As I mentioned, I love our lab because we can create a pretty natural environment, but there's nothing that can beat actually being in the natural environment that the user would be in. And in some cases, that has to happen. In some cases, we can't mimic. We tried one time mimicking a operating room. It looked pretty good, except for the carpet on the ground, but it's really not a substitute for speaking with a nurse in a hospital and understanding the sounds and the noises while they're trying to interact with something on a screen. And then there's the convenience level. And I also probably could have added convenience to observers or stakeholders. Sometimes maybe you've finally got the ear of the important stakeholders on your team and they want to watch all the sessions. Well, you know what? In that case, some of these options that we're going to talk about don't really lend itself to having a bunch of observers. But if you've got people who are really interested and are finally listening to the work that you're doing, maybe it really is the best thing to rent a lab or to rent a space to be able to do those sessions so people can watch. And lastly, something that's really important is confidentiality. So of course, we see a lot of things that are confidential, and so we want to make sure that whatever usability testing methods we're using are going to honor that. That's not always the case, that it needs to be confidential, but that's something to definitely keep in mind. And I think it's something that people easily forget, especially with some of the methods we'll talk about. Some of these methods just straight up are not going to keep whatever product or interface or idea that you have discreet. We can't trust, I want to trust our users, but we can't always trust them to keep things discreet. So for instance, let's say that we wanted to see how users follow instructions with our product. So for instance, our questions might be, are the instructions clear? Does it lead to success? Where do they struggle? So I'm going to think about my question, and I'm going to now think about take a little inventory. So let's say that I feel like for this particular study, it's not really that important to be, I don't need like a lot of people. So maybe I want to target about 10 people to get a general idea so that we can make some design decisions. Maybe I've decided, for this one location, I don't need to go to a lot. It doesn't need to be representative of across the country or the world. I don't have a ton of time, but I do want people, I really need people to be in their natural environment. Let's say that it was something that you were setting up on your television, and you want to create the scene that is going to be as natural as possible. And so it could be that then I decide that the most important thing for me in this case is to provide a natural environment. And from here on out, I'm going to set up the study the way that's going to satisfy that most important priority. So as a preview, these are the things that I'm going to be talking about today in terms of some different usability testing styles or methods that we've used. So taking the idea of, recruiting, setting up the idea of the tasks that are to be done, having people do those tasks, and then getting feedback, all of those elements still remain the same. But in this case, what we're doing is trying out different ways of having people actually participate in that testing. So let's go back to our traditional in-lab usability testing. We've already talked about it, but the idea here, the types of answers that you get from traditional in-lab usability testing really are those true usability metrics. I mean, when you can see the screen that the person's working on, or see the complete area that they're at, and you can see their face, and you can have a conversation with them, you can record all of those things, like the pass, fail, the struggle, the ease of use. You can collect metrics. You can collect biometrics. You can time the tasks. You can collect all of the metrics that you need to collect, and you can record pretty awesome video and get really great photos. The pros to this are you can keep your environment completely controlled. I know we've had situations where we need to make sure that the network stays at the same speed for every single participant, so it doesn't confound the results. And you've got access to technology, whether you're in your own lab or you're in a rented lab. You're able to, if you run out of something or need something or suddenly want to pivot to do something different, you can always have technology at your disposal. I mean, probably the biggest problems with in-lab usability testing really, or the big cons, are that it really is quite expensive. It's not always accessible to everyone. It does create a pretty sterile environment in a lot of cases, especially if you're not using your own lab. Sometimes it just doesn't feel quite at home, right? It's like you're entertaining someone in a different space. And it really can introduce bias. We've done sessions before for clients where we walk in through the front door, have to check in at the counter, and our participants have to do the same thing. And I know that they feel different knowing that they're coming to a specific company than they do knowing that they're coming to kind of a neutral, just research facility. But one of the great things about traditional in-lab usability testing is that you can really run as many numbers as you want, but I'm kind of trying to be realistic here. Over the course of a week, you could run 30, maybe even 40 sessions, depending on how long. With research facilities, you can easily choose, several cities to do the testing in and provide a pretty cohesive experience. It does take a bit of time to manage all of that, but it is quite convenient to the moderator. And you can keep the confidentiality for sure in the in-lab usability testing. Also, you can accommodate to not just on screen, right? It's anything. It's devices, it's out-of-box experiences, and it's also on screen as well. So another idea, taking it now from the lab, starting to think about another way of doing testing is what we call pop-up. So lab pop-up is when we take the user testing on the road. So this is a way of us setting up shop in a space that now maybe the idea is that we want to create an even more natural environment. But we could go, in this particular case, we wanted to have a living room experience that felt really on par, and we wanted to go to multiple cities to be able to do that. We could go to every single participant's home, but that was going to take too much time. And also, we weren't going to be able to make sure that the experience was roughly the same between participants. And that's something that is definitely very important. The idea of wanting, on a true usability test, you want to make sure that you're not having the distractions at one house of like a baby crying, in another house, everything's just, they have as much time in the world to be able to handle things. Maybe you do want those distractions as a part of your study, and that's fine, but in many cases, you want to keep things as similar as possible, as constant, so that you can evaluate those results. So, the real positives of this is you can still create the context for the users, but you can get away from that lab environment. And you can have access to more geographical areas than even any of the research facilities have. Some of the cons, though, is there is quite a bit of logistics in getting this all figured out, although it is possible, and sometimes it can be a little bit expensive. Some other examples of when we've set up shop in just like a hotel, and then also in a hospital as well. So you can still keep the confidentiality for the most part with these types of studies when you do a pop-up, and it really opens up the location to anywhere that you want to be. And one of the best things is really getting as natural of an environment as possible. So some of the ways that we do this, just to spark some ideas for you, I put on here just some examples of some of the ways that you could do a pop-up. For instance, WeWork or some type of a co-working space. If you're worried about people coming to your office to do a usability test and you don't have, you don't want them to know what company it's for or whatever, you can always use a co-working space. Something like Peerspace or Airbnb are great ways to be able to secure locations. You're going to have to do a little bit of work to make sure that they're going to be okay with what you're going to be doing there. But we've had a lot of luck with that. And hotels are great too, because you can always rent a conference room or something, have a lot of amenities for someone to be there, provide food and all of that for you, but have a little less traditional lab situation. So taking it a little further is the idea of intercepts. So in this case, in the first one, we're talking about pop-ups where we create a usability testing lab basically within an environment that we've created. But intercepts take it actually to the people. So in this case, we were doing sessions for public transportation and apps that people were using. So we went to where people are. We went to the bus stop and to the light rail station, and we did a very mini screener. I mean, obviously, if they were waiting for public transportation, chances are they were going to be the type of person that we needed to talk to, but there were a few screening questions that we'd run through with them, and if they were a match, we would continue on with our short usability test. In some cases, even, we were flexible. We got onto the bus with them and took the bus to wherever they were going so that we could finish the session with them. So this is great because the recruiting's on the fly and the context is like obviously immediately understood. And one sort of really special thing that came out of this is it's almost like you're doing an ethnography and a usability test. But as a researcher, you gather so much, or you gain so much empathy by actually experiencing what your user is experiencing while you're doing this. I will say one of the cons, I'm a little bit of an introvert and I don't like being shot down, but it is a little discouraging because you're asking people if they want to participate and you think, here's this great opportunity, I'm going to give you a gift card, but you get shot down a lot. So sometimes that can be discouraging, and taking notes is sometimes hard, and you can't always keep the consistency between participants. So for something like this, it is a little bit exhausting, I'm not going to lie, but so you can't always get a ton of people, but if you split up and do this, then you could have a target of 10 to 30 people. You go right where they are. The time investment is a little bit high because it does require being out and about, and you're not guaranteed that, you could be trying to intercept people for 2 hours and only talk to 2 people, and that might be discouraging, but you are going to be clear that you've got the right type of people. The convenience to the participant is great, and the cost is really quite low for doing something like this. I put confidentiality with a question mark because I do believe that, let's say that in one study we were having trouble finding people that had a very particular type of computer. And after the study was over, I went to a coffee shop in the area, and maybe just my eyes were opened up to it, but it seemed like everybody in that coffee shop had the computer that we were looking for. And I started to think, this is a great way to, here's people in a coffee shop. I could have done an intercept here and run through my study with them in a relatively confidential way. I mean, you always run the risk, but depending on how confidential the thing is that you're looking at, it actually might work if you can be in a corner of the coffee shop doing something like that. So what kinds of tools do you need for something like this? I mean, it's really quite simple. It's a notepad, it's a backpack, and it's your tennis shoes, because you are going to be walking around, talking to people, and getting that feedback. You probably can't record the sessions. It's just adding one more thing into the mix, but you may be able to voice record it just so that you can go back and take a look at that later. Okay, so another option is the remote moderated feedback, or remote moderated sessions. We're going to talk about the unmoderated sessions, which most of us, I'm sure, are familiar with in a moment. But the remote moderated one is one of the ones that I really like, although it is more geared toward doing something on just a traditional screen experience. But what's really great about doing remote moderated sessions is that you can ask people questions. You can lead them through what you're going to be doing. And you don't need to rent a lab space. You don't need to travel across the country. You can sit from your desk or your home office or wherever it is, and with a simple, WebEx or any kind of a meeting software, you can get into a conversation with a user and have them go through the tasks with you. So remote moderated testing is really one of my favorite methods. And this example doesn't show it, but you could obviously also set up a webcam so you could see the participant as well. It still does take time because you have to run through the session, but the participant is probably in their natural environment, and they're going to feel a little bit more comfortable about what they're doing. I will say one time we did something like this. We were testing nurses, and we had a prototype that we wanted them to look at. And I had underestimated how distracted the nurses would be during the session. I mean, they probably shouldn't have said they would do it while they were on shift, let's just say, but I think that's one thing you don't have control of. So that could be a con. But at the end of the day, the idea of being able to run a session without having to be right there physically with the person and get those answers in a really simple and relatively cheap way is great. Okay, so let's see. So nowadays, there are at least two that I know of, tools that allow you to do remote moderated feedback. These used to be just straight unmoderated. Now you can use these tools to do it as well, and they'll do the recruiting for you, which does help with some of the burden. But if cost is one of your issues, because these are quite expensive, you can just hack together an example for your or option for yourself. And this is what we do, using something like Google Hangouts plus Dropbox or Google Drive, where you've got things at your disposal to be able to send to the participant or show to the participant. You can use something like even SurveyMonkey. I don't have it on here, but you can have SurveyMonkey on here as well, where you're marking down the responses and it's automatically tabulating things. You can use other tools such as like Handrail or other things that you might be using to keep track of scores while you're going, so it's not as much of a time burden. So the other method that has become quite popular is the idea of remote unmoderated testing. And this really was quite groundbreaking when this happened, because you don't need to rent a lab space, and you also don't have to do the sessions, which is kind of a bummer because I love doing the sessions. But when you're trying to get a lot of numbers, and this is where you go back to that list of all the different types of, or what's most important to you. When you want to get those numbers, sometimes doing an unmoderated session is the best way to do it. Or maybe you've got just a few questions that you want to have answered that you want to get some fast feedback on before you do a traditional usability study. And this is how we use this, is wanting to get some fast feedback before doing a usability study, so I don't spend my precious time in that usability study or that remote session or whatever the case might be with tasks that we've been able to already identify. The cons of this, and the biggest cons of this really are a couple of things that are big deals to me. And so you have to determine if this is going to be okay for you or not. But there's really no way to course correct a session. I mean, when you have these unmoderated tools and you send this out to your participants to do the session, you don't know what they're going to do. And you don't know if when you ask them to say how they're feeling or say how they thought about it, you don't know how they're going to respond. And for those of us who have done moderated sessions, we know that you ask a participant to expand and they don't, you have to ask in a different way, and you can't get that with the unmoderated sessions. The other issue with unmoderated sessions is that you sometimes actually think, this is one of those where you think it's going to save you time, but what actually ends up happening is it takes more time, because now you need to watch the videos. You can pay for that to happen with a lot of the companies that are out there, and that's awesome. But if you're doing this yourself, sending out 50 videos to get feedback is great until you get the 50 videos back, and now you've got to watch a portion of them or all of them and do the analysis. So you do have to think through the whole process before you jump into that idea. So one thing to keep in mind with the unmoderated is that, and with the moderated sessions that are remote, is it's 100% not confidential. Whatever you put in front of people, I mean, some of you may even be screenshotting parts of this presentation. That's what I do during webinars too, right? So the same thing is true with when you're doing these unmoderated or moderated sessions. You have no idea what people are doing with what they're seeing on there. And so that's something that you really do need to keep in mind. And if that confidentiality is important to you, I hate to break it to you, but this is not the right type of study for you to do. So maybe you do it on a competitor, maybe you do it on something similar, but you really do need to think through where this is going and all of that. So over the course of the years, we've used several different tools for unmoderated testing, and I put some of them here. In fact, I did a search on Google. You, I'm sure, have all done it too. You type it in there, and I think it was like, I don't know, it was like so many responses or so many different types of companies that are out there now for unmoderated testing. And so we actually did also create our own we responded to this because we didn't want to have to watch all the sessions, and we didn't want to pay for someone else to watch them. So we created a tool called UX Reaction that's just kind of launching soon, or it's going to be available soon. That's actually free, and you can go ahead and just get your results really quickly and easily. So a lot of these tools will give you results as well. You have to figure out, and each of them have their own pluses and minuses. Some of the negatives too are that you can't always guarantee that you're going to have great participants. We run into that ourselves too. We like to just recruit our own participants so that we know that we're going to have quality feedback. But there's definitely a lot of options out there for doing the unmoderated fast feedback. Okay, so another example that we can do is screen recording. And so this is something that now on the iPhones just sort of came out. This idea of sending out a usability test to a participant and having them create their own screen recording. And I know that some of the unmoderated tools allow for mobile interactions, and like I know ours does as well, but the idea is in this case, you could send a packet to a participant, and a digital packet, I guess, basically, and you could basically say, okay, here's what you're going to do. First, you're going to open up the first page, and then you're going to turn on your screen recording. Here's how you do it, and here's the first task that you're going to do. And then have them answer the questions out loud. They can create basically a usability study for you on their phone that then they can send to you, and then you can pay them for their time and all of that. So this is a great way to be able to get participants to do it at their own pace. You can give them a deadline for when to do it, and it's basically an assignment. It's extremely low cost. There's hardly any equipment required at all except for the participant themselves. And but it still does come with its course corrections its negatives where you can't course correct. And it does rely on participants to follow instructions. And it's limited to non-hardware. Another example here is just showing the idea of, okay, I showed you the idea on a phone. Here's an idea on the web. So you could have somebody look at a website, or maybe look at a prototype or something like that. And sometimes we'll mix this with like a SurveyMonkey or some type form or some type of a questionnaire. So they could be doing the study and then following along with the questionnaire, answering the questions, and getting that feedback as they go. So the screen recording at the user's own pace is a really great way of basically, in a way, you've sort of hacked your own unmoderated testing method. Does it require a little bit more time? Yeah, it does. Do you need to find participants? Yes, it does. Or yes, you do. You could use, some of the tools that are out there for finding participants. You could, post it on places or whatever you want to do. You could pay for the participants to get recruited and then run the sessions this way. But the bottom line is, by using QuickTime or by using using a phone to do those screen recordings and SurveyMonkey, you've basically created your own way of doing those unmoderated testing. You still have to analyze the results, but you've put that into the hands of your participant and made it a lot easier for them. But I'm really sensitive to the fact that not everything is a screen experience. There's a lot of non-screen experiences that we want to test. And so a lot of our clients, it's not as simple as just being a website or just being an app or a prototype, or a wireframe. So in cases where you've got non-screen experiences, this is another way that you can, in my one example of doing a pop-up, you could do a non-screen experience in a pop-up. But in this case, we've also provided the participant with a video camera, or they had a video camera, and they were able to just document their own setup process. In this case, it was for a nest. So again, you give them a deadline, you let them go for it, and you give them, it's a very real in context look to what's going on. But again, as the moderator, you can't course correct and get deeper insights, although with these, if you know the participant that you've recruited, I mean, if you've had that exchange and have given them the information, you could always schedule, like combine this with a follow-up phone call to ask them questions that came up while you were watching their sessions. It does require that they would have a camera. I mean, most people have it on their phone, but would need to be able to record the session and know how to as well. This is an example of one of our, oops, here we go. An example where we also had people do they were doing like a Blue Apron meal prep thing. And so we had them do a video to just talk about what their process was for putting that together. So we were trying to understand the process and if the instructions made sense. So again, just another example, he's just using his phone here, and it's super convenient to everyone. It's not that expensive, a little bit of time in terms of the coordination. But again, you may be able to have some confidentiality, but if it's something of your product that you want them to be interacting with, sometimes or especially if it's a prototype or a beta or something like that, then you're not going to be able to have that confidentiality. So for those non-screen experiences, you can ask them to use their phone. You can ask them to use their computer. You could even use like a drop cam, live cam, or live stream type of a scenario if you wanted to set up a time to do that, so that you could actually maybe also ask feedback right after the fact. That's another great way to be able to do that. So with all of these ideas, I just want to really encourage us to plan well. So always run a pilot. Whenever you're going to try something new like this, run a pilot so that you can see where do people get tripped up. And think to yourself, how am I going to provide tasks? Or am I going to provide tasks to them a day before they do the session? Am I going to provide tasks to them a minute before they do the session? Will I be providing it to them in a way where they have to, they can't see the next page? So maybe SurveyMonkey or something like that is the best way to flip to the next page. Are you going to collect ratings? What kind of instructions are needed? And, don't just run that by your coworker, run that by someone who's totally not involved in what you're doing, to make sure that when you say, okay, you're going to screen record on your phone, do people know what that means? Take screenshots, make a screen recording yourself to show what that means. Help them be set up for success. And then think about all the logistics of how are they going to get those videos and photos to you? I mean, that's your goal from having them do the research or from doing the research. So make sure that you plan well and make it fun for them. I mean, most participants are really anxious to give feedback. And so if you can make it a little bit fun and on their own terms, then you can be really successful. So just in closing, I thought this was a great example of a project. I met Daniel at a UXPA conference. He was a student at the time, and he did a study. This maybe makes you feel a little bit queasy, but he did a study with using Google Glass and having people look for things in a library. And I thought this was a great use of technology in terms of being able to see, you want to do something where you're seeing it from the user point of view. We have the technology in terms of there's Google Glass or different types of things, even, a GoPro or something like that. Where we can set people up to do something in a way that puts them in the exact location of where they need to be. So I just thought this was a great example, and I keep looking for a project that we can do this with, but haven't had one to do it. I don't want to force it, but I love the idea of having the study happen from this POV. So my encouragement to you is to build your own hack. Think about, for you, what's your plus type of a solution. Think about the technology that you do have. Think about what you want to test. Consider that list of what's most important to you, and then don't really be afraid to try something new. Let it be a little bit rocky. Pivot to make it work a little bit better. And if for no other reason, keep your research skills fresh by introducing new methods. You're really going to see how great of a researcher you are when you put yourself into a situation of trying new things. All right, guys, so those are my questions, or that's mine. I'm going to get your questions now. If you have any, you can type them in there. Let me get over there so I can answer them. Oops. Okay, hold on a second.
Hey, Sarah. Just
Yeah.
want to say thank you. Thanks so much for your webinar today. Very insightful, and you're super excited to get to try out some of these ideas. So thanks for sharing all of this. Um, we are getting a lot of questions. Keep sending them, everyone. Can you see the questions, Sarah, or do you want me to?
Yeah, can you ask them, because it just quit on me.
Yeah, of course, no worries.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. What type of platform are you using to record usability responses during an intercept?
So during an intercept, we are using just like the voice recorder on our phone. In that case, I'm trying to do the most minimum type of a thing as possible. And it's just too hard. We tried doing like video cameras and things like that, and that was just too complicated.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So somebody asking if there is any tool you would recommend to record mobile phone usability testing.
So we, like in our lab, when we're, I don't know if it's like in lab or if it's out, but so the tool that we use, the one that we created, the UX reaction for unmoderated testing, works, is almost ready to launch for that. I think, I believe, I don't remember which one of the other tools also has that. But if you're doing it in your own lab and you're setting it up, you can just simply give somebody an iPhone and you can set the screen recording and record it that way. You can connect it to your computer as well, so that you can record what's on their screen. So there's a lot of ways actually now, whether they're doing it themselves or whether you're doing it where you can have it be recorded just through screen recording.
Mm-hmm. And somebody also saying that you mentioned agile and that agile can create more work. So what kind of issues did you experience and how did you work around them?
Yeah, so I think sometimes with agile, you think to yourself like, okay, so for instance, in the unmoderated testing, you think to yourself, this is great. I'm going to get feedback so quickly. I'm going to be able to get what I need for this study. But then you realize, oh my gosh, I've got to watch all these videos. Or even with the intercepts, sometimes you think like, I'm just going to go get some feedback from all of these from these people, but then, because you couldn't record the sessions and you couldn't measure time on task, now I've got to go back and I've got to watch the videos, or I have to listen to what I had said or what people had said during those sessions. So, sometimes it works well, and sometimes I feel like that if you didn't plan well enough, often is what ends up happening. You realize there were metrics or there were things that you wish that you would have been keeping track of during that, that you didn't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What are your thoughts on note capture tools?
On remote capture tools?
Note capture?
Oh, note, like, I'm wondering if that means, I don't know exactly what that means.
Okay, so if
Meaning, like taking notes maybe?
yeah, that's what I'm thinking. That's what I'm thinking that is. But if the person who asked can clarify, oh yeah, so she's saying taking notes. Yeah.
Yeah, so you guys, I've tried a lot of different things, and maybe I'm just becoming a curmudgeon about things, but I just prefer to take notes in Excel or in a Google Sheet. I mean, I know there's a lot of really great tools out there, and I'm not the one to talk to about that, because at the end of the day, I feel like those are a hindrance to me listening to the sessions and things. So I'm not a big. I use Word or Excel or my pen and paper.
Awesome. So somebody's commenting here about, and asking if POV is a type of diary study. So can you provide us some names of good tools for this specific type of study?
Sure. So when POV, you could do it as a diary study where you have them, I guess if I'm thinking of a diary study, I'm thinking of that more as there's less instruction and more of them sharing, right? But for a usability test in that particular type of a scenario, a usability test, I would say POV is more like maybe I've given it to them on, Google Docs or something. I've said, here's what I'm going to want you to do. First, I want you to, set this up. Then I want you to do this, or then I want you to answer this question. And so in those cases, I think the best way to do that is simply have them videotape themselves and provide them with some type of a guide to go through. So whether that's through some kind of a survey tool, or whether that's through like a booklet on, Google Docs or something. But in terms of a diary study, we have used things like DScout, and we have other tools that we are working on ourselves because we wanted them to be a little bit less expensive and a little bit easier to use. But at the end of the day, you can do a diary study just as well by giving people access to a Google Drive and saying, hey, post your photos into here, or even text this number, the photos that happen, with a little description about what happened. And you can gather that information just as easily without needing to use any expensive tools.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Some people are curious about how often you go back and listen to the voice recordings or video recordings from a usability test.
So I don't think this makes me a bad researcher, but as infrequently as possible. I personally believe in trying to capture as much as you can during the session, and then in cases where I can't take really great notes, then I will often just reserve time at the end of the day to be able to have a little reflection time about what I saw and what I heard, and then make notes to myself about what I might need to listen to. So I don't review the recordings that often unless there's something that I feel like I've missed. And then usually I'm working, there's usually someone else working on the project along with me to make sure that we've been seeing the same thing.
Mm-hmm. Great. And a couple of people here asking about how you determine the correct sample size for remote moderated.
Okay, so that one really just depends. I kind of think about that as being almost the same as a in-lab usability test, because other than it's saving you the time of organizing the lab and setting that up, and then saving you the expense of the lab itself, it still is taking just as much time to run the sessions, if not even a little bit more, because getting set up for them before each session and all of that. But the idea is that I typically, when we do remote moderated sessions, we usually have them be about that number 10 to 30 that we typically would do for an in-person usability testing session. But because it is, less of a draw on resources, you could do a lot more and interject them throughout the course of like a month, And I know I didn't mention this, but I think SNEO has a tool where they do like intercepts. So you can get people on, if you have like a site, you can intercept them and then have them schedule an appointment to do a session with you at a later date.
Mm-hmm. And Annalisa here says that you mentioned to avoid testing with friends, family in a lean usability testing setting. Does the same apply to colleagues, assuming you all work at the organization creating the product?
Yeah, I'm really not. I'm more of a fan of friends and family than colleagues, for sure. There's just really, I just think even if you're saying, okay, well, this person works in accounting and they don't know anything about what we're doing, I totally get it. But I really believe that it's better than nothing. But I really believe that if that's kind of the main way that you're doing it, I really feel like you should push yourself to do something a little bit different. Even friends and family is better, in my opinion, or at least your colleagues' friends and family would be better than your colleague or your friends and family.
Cool. We are getting towards the end. So there are some interesting questions here that don't have necessarily to do with usability. I'll get one of them, and there are a few questions about recruiting too. So maybe we can think about another webinar to talk more specifically about recruitment and all the ins and outs of that. But I'm going to share a question from somebody who is asking you. I mean, it's a broad question, but how do you become a user researcher, and not what are your recommendations to for someone who would like to enter the field?
Okay, so I became one in a very untraditional way. I was actually a participant first, and long story short, was a participant in a study, and then ended up working for UE Group. So I was a participant at UE Group and then ended up working here. And so I don't recommend that as your path to get in, but I will say that I think one thing that it's given me, kind of working my way up in the ranks, has been having that understanding and empathy for what that's like from a participant perspective. And I think that's why I really bring in this sense of wanting to have things be natural for people. And so my best advice really is that you just keep trying, try different things, see where you naturally feel a fit. Don't feel like to be a researcher you have to only jump in at researcher 2 level. You can start as a note taker and you learn. You start as a recruiter and you learn. Every piece of the process is super important to the results. And so for you to be a part of any part of that process is just getting you closer and closer to becoming a researcher, a good researcher.
Yeah. This is awesome, Sarah. Thanks so much. And for everybody who has these questions about becoming a researcher or getting into the UX field, just a heads up that we are organizing a panel with experts in the area who are going to be talking about this. This is going to happen in a couple of months. So, of course, everybody will know. We will send more information by email. But, thanks for all these questions. Thanks, Sarah, for the amazing webinar today. Hope sure, everybody have a great.
Yeah, and feel free to email me if you have any questions.
Is your email in the slides too?
It is. My computer's frozen, but it's Sarah, SARAH, @uegroup.com. And yeah, I'll provide the slides later.
Okay, perfect. Thanks so much. Bye, everybody.
Okay, thank you.